let's start. Clock is ticking, time is precious, and we have some very interesting people up on stage. So today, as you know, we're talking about how women can use networks and technology to advance. And so I know that that is an issue that is key to my heart and everyone on stage, and hopefully everyone in the audience. And so I don't think I'm going to go into like the actual introductions, but I would like, Farnaz, if you could just start, and then we'll go to Romy, and then we have Brenda, and then we have Stacia. Just give everybody a little quick rundown, minute maybe, so we can save some time. But tell us about your companies, and then we can get into how your companies are working to leverage women's careers.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Farnaz Ronaghi, and I am CTO and co-founder at NovoEd. We are a social collaborative online learning platform, and we enable professional development opportunities for everyone, including women.
Nice.
I'm Romi Neumann. I'm the president and co-founder of Fairygodboss. We are the largest career community for women. We have a social mission, which is to improve the workplace for women by creating transparency. So I can't really think of a better place for me to be talking. We're about 4 years old, and I'm very proud to say that we are a venture-backed company supported by GSV.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Darden Wilkerson, and I'm the president and CEO of AnitaB.org, which is named after our founder, Anita Borg. We're a women in tech organization. We're international, and our job is to elevate the conversation around opportunity for women in tech and to help our corporate customers to create a more meaningful and inclusive environment for a diverse workforce.
Hi everybody, I'm Statia Gar, and I am the co-founder and principal analyst at a firm called RedThread Research. We do research on human capital, specifically learning, talent management, diversity inclusion, people analytics, and the technologies that support them. I passed out a little summary of some research that we've done on this topic of women and networks, because this is a piece of ongoing research that we're doing, and we think that there's a lot to be said about what could be done differently in this space. So looking forward to this.
Great, okay, so I'm just going to throw some stats out at everyone because I work at Forbes. We like numbers and we like stats. So did everyone know that in the tech field about 17% of founders are females? That's bad news, right? 30% in ed tech, that's great. 40% of the founders here at this conference are females, which is amazing. So I think that we should all be very proud of that and really salute ASU GSV for selecting these companies, not just because they were female founded, but because they're great female founded companies. So education, as we know, is a gendered space generally, as is like human resources and careers. And so that gives women the leverage, maybe the leverage that we need. Maybe it's just a place to start. So let's just talk about like how this is the sweet spot for women, this particular sector. And then we can go on to actually building the technology. So, Stacia, why don't you start at the end there?
Sure. Yeah, so human resources, like education, 70% of human resource professionals are women. So I think it's an important thing for us to think about as we're building our practices and our approaches to understand certainly kind of what their experience is of women, and not to kind of leave that aside, because I think that sometimes that's what we end up seeing. One of the things that we've seen in our research has been that the networks of men and women tend to look different, and so as we're thinking about the different practices that we should be implementing in our organizations, it's about expanding beyond the individuals that we know, whether that's as people who are in HR or people who are in education, but expanding beyond to the other gender to understand how can we maybe advance and promote people differently than we have in the past. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would add to that, I think what's been very encouraging for us at Fairygodboss is that 3 or 4 years ago when we started talking to companies about the importance of having strategic initiatives to bring on more female hires, there was less urgency, there was less enthusiasm. And now today, it was just less funding, it was less of a top priority, and I think two fantastic things have happened to benefit women in this space. One is there's a major talent shortage, and so more and more companies are having to devote dedicated resources and initiatives to driving interest from female talent. I think recently there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how trucking companies are putting together strategic initiatives to bring on more female talent. So that has happened. And then I think overall there's been more of sort of a recognition or acknowledgement that, to your point, we've moved from this manufacturing economy to a service and idea economy, where the traits that women historically and often bring to a conversation are more important and more instrumental in driving results for the overall business. And so I think we've seen that sort of, there's a need and then a kind of a perception change that means that there are more women involved in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there's also like the social climate has changed at all? And maybe Brenda, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can look at that. And our organization is not only international, so we're looking at a lot of different cultural differences and how this whole thing plays out and what the needs are in various different geographies. But I think also by age, right? So if we specifically were to talk about millennials, we know that they are actually helpful in this trend in that they do a better job of interviewing the company than, say, earlier generations did, and making demands of, you know, how are your women treated? Where are your women? What are the roles that they're in? And so there's much more visibility, and that puts companies kind of back on their heels to actually address this issue and make it much more front and center than maybe it was in the past. And so I think that is one really great positive. I think the other thing to think about is, you know, really if we kind of turn this around from its beginning, words are really important. You know, I really was drawn to the whole token representation piece and what that means, and it really brings attention to the fact that, you know, tokenism in and of itself is the ability to just kind of do perfunctory or, you know, kind of pretend like I'm interested in this issue sort of efforts that don't necessarily bring us the increase in the numbers of folks into these positions that we'd like for them to have. And therefore, what you end up having is a situation where there's this revolving door. People come in and they leave. Mm-hmm. What we've encouraged companies to do is we've said to them, are you asking the right kinds of questions? Are you using the data correctly? For instance, are your women leaving? Don't just count how many come, but count how many go. And ask questions about who did they work with? What was the representation on the team? How many other women were on the team? Was the boss a man or was the boss a woman? If it was a man, did the man have experience working with diverse teams? And these sorts of things began to be counted and maybe also remediated against.
Well, I mean, for those of you who work directly with HR departments is that the sort of thing where they're coming to you for advice? Is this something that you're able to counsel them on? Is it something you need to present to them, like, you know, you better watch out for this because it's going to bite you if you're not paying attention to it? Or are they actively seeking your counsel? You want to change?
What we see in the market and in our customer base is that there is the realization that there needs to be professional development provided for people, for the workforce that has been male-dominated, to understand what it means to what unconscious biases mean. What do they do in practice? What do they look like? So there is a realization that the mandate at the high level for being more diverse, for being more inclusive, on its own is not going to make any change happen. So we actually see them coming to us and asking for either recommendations on how to implement that kind of training and how to bring people together to understand the differences and to remove the biases that exist. And at the same time, we also see the realization that to promote women more in the workforce, to give them more leadership opportunities, there needs to be training, there needs to be professional development that is catered to them. Many women in the workforce have different parameters, different challenges than their male colleagues, and for them to be able to take part, for them to be able to advance their careers, they need to be able to bring all of those challenges to the table and discuss them. So providing safe environments for the women, training opportunities catered to them to be able to discuss these and resolve them is becoming more and more what we see in our customer base implemented in Fortune 500 organizations.
Yeah, I would say more than ever, the desire is there and the stated goal is there and the management kind of objective has been laid out. And mostly what companies struggle with is just that change is so hard. And that also businesses have terribly competing priorities and terrible financial pressures, and it's really hard to bring about change. So I think one thing that companies can think about doing is just getting really laser focused on incentives. You look at someone like Microsoft, who's got, for managers at Microsoft, part of your incentive compensation is based on how diverse your team is. And so I think when companies can get really out of the box about being that specific about tying the diversity goal into the fabric of everything they do every day, that's how change can really come and quickly.
Right, and sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, a big part of that, though, is data. And that's one of the big shifts that we're starting to see, is the request for data, and not just representation data, not just EEOC data, but actually looking at, to your point, who are the interviewers? Were they all men? Were they all white? Were they whatever classifications? What was the experience of the team? Whether it's doing surveys of inclusivity. I've seen a lot of work now with organizational network analysis tools to understand actually who is connected to whom in an organization, and are people from a diverse background connected at the same level, or in the same types of connections as others, at the same, and when I say level, like literally hierarchical level in the organization. So there's been a big shift with the increased datafication in HR, and an ability to see things differently, and that is, I think, helping drive some of the priorities, because I think that you're absolutely right. There's a lot of competing priorities, but when you're able to say, when we add 2 diverse interviewers to our panel, we are able to increase our rate at which we transition people into the organization by X%, they'll make the investment. It's just, if we can't prove it, then it falls flat.
So I'd like to just sort of leverage your point on data, because we're talking right now about how women in HR departments, in fact, and companies can use networks and technology. But I'd like to switch a little bit to those of you who are founders and CEOs, people who are actually building the technology. Is it necessary to literally build new technology that will advance women, or do we need to adapt existing technology? How should we look at this in the building process of your businesses, of the literal technology?
Yeah, well, so I'll jump in. I mean, I think, and we talked a little in our preparation, there are fabulous tools out there, for example, that are, there's a tool called TextEO that is designed to reduce bias in job descriptions, because believe it or not, job descriptions can be very gendered. And also we know that women have a different level of standard in terms of what will incite them to apply for a job versus a man. And so I think the question on the table is, should we, can we, how do we deploy new technology, even AI, to help reduce bias versus to kind of make up for human differences, or how much do we help change ourselves? So, I mean, I think about something like, at our company we have an adage, and we talk about the fact that women are just not as comfortable bragging. And at all of our events, we start by asking women to brag, and you can see them. And me too, you can see them, many of them, most of them, feel physically uncomfortable about it. And then it feels good afterwards. But what happens is you take a resume, you take a LinkedIn profile, you take an interview, you take any kind of series of interactions in a hiring process, and that can be changed. So yes, we can build technology, and we should investigate and look at technology that helps bridge the gap. But then I also think we all have to just become more conscious about these differences in the way we all operate, and learn to acknowledge it in each other, and As women, we can think about bragging a little more, and as men, we can recognize that if we're interviewing a woman, she's probably not going to brag as much as a guy might.
Right.
And so a little technology and a little humanism, I think.
Yeah. And I almost would say it's more the human side, it's the system side. The technology should assist, and I think many times that we know that AI is very much impacted by the bias of the folks that build it, and so we have to discuss that as well. But I think in terms of the systems that exist around what the expectations are of what success looks like, of what people specifically in tech teams, because I speak to tech teams, look like, we know that the narrative does, when you think in pictures of a technologist, still we don't have the picture of the female technologist coming up in people's minds. And so we have to figure out what can we do in those human systems to overcome the narrative that is in existence until we normalize the fact that teams should be 50% of the population are women, 50% of those teams probably should be women as well. And until we get there, what can we do? And I think you started speaking to it. In our hiring practices, we make sure that the teams that are interviewing are highly diverse, as well as the team that we are interviewing, right? So everybody's heard of the Rooney Rule, and we now know the data show that worked sort of, but not necessarily, and sometimes it worked adversely because then that one person, if there was one person on that slate of folks that was different, well, then they stood out for their differences. Instead, you want to make sure that there's 2 to 3 out of 5 or 6, and then therefore then it is a set of people, and you're looking specifically at the differences in the skills. I am an introvert, and it is difficult. People say, really? I can't tell that, really, you know. But really I am, and if given the opportunity, I probably wouldn't say much at all, but we know that it's not practical. But we also have a whole set of the population who should not be we should not be denied the ability to have their skill sets at the table because they don't behave in a certain way that has historically been the way we expected. So is that the technology? Maybe in certain cases where we're able to remove certain terms that we know are characteristically biased, but in terms of the people systems, it's an adjustment that has to be made for the folks at the table, HR, the hiring managers. Why are all the hiring managers of a certain type versus being diverse? That's something we control. That's not anything, any software.
Well, I would also argue that each of you has used your business, your technology-based business, to show leadership. And that's not just an internal thing about being a co-founder or a CEO. That's about sitting here on stage right now. So can you speak a little bit about, like, you said you're an introvert, like, why is it important for women to advance? Is it important for you to be sitting here and for this to be an audience of both genders, many ages, many different backgrounds? Why is your presence so important here?
It's the role models for everyone to be able. So for every girl to be a computer scientist, for example, as I am, they need to be able to picture a girl that is on their computer working, maybe as my 3-year-old pointed out to me, like, girl laptops have stickers, like, and not worry about those generalizations that people seem to start making at the age of 3. So it's the role of technology, actually, the way I look at it is, when it comes to hiring and things of that sort, many of the biases that we may not be able to just call out by looking at how someone behaves, software can call out. If I look at the data from Greenhouse and I see that someone is just rejecting the female screens left and right, there is something there to be talked about, to be discovered. So it actually can facilitate the behavioral changes that we want to make. For me, myself, the way I got into the entrepreneurship journey was through Stanford, and was by seeing a Tina Seelig at Stanford eCorner, a Susan Howard from IDEO, being able to work with them and look at these women who are very successful, who are incredibly good at what they do, and at the same time, when I look at them and I hear their stories, they have had the challenges that I used to face back then. So for everyone, the role models are important, and technology is part of what can make what can highlight those role models for us.
Yeah, I would say even beyond role models, though. kind of going back to the networks concept, we know that the vast majority of opportunities come from informal channels, informal conversations that we have. And we also know that people's tendency is to spend time with people who look like them, whatever that means. And so if there are not women at the top who are having the conversation, getting access to that informal information, and then continuing to share that with other women or people of whatever color or whichever demographic you want to talk about, if you're not doing that, the other people are not going to rise. It's just as simple as that. And so just an information, communication, access to insights and opportunities is essential. So for anybody who's on the stage anywhere, to have that information, it is, I think, incumbent on you to share it. Because if you're not, others are not going to rise.
Right, and I think, it just goes without saying that being able to see others in the role that you aspire to, even if that's not the one that you're going for first, is meaningful as people have choices about where they go. And I want to say a little bit more about role models. I think it's important for us as women to be role models in our place for other women, but I think it's also important for men to see us in the roles that we're in so that it's not so foreign to them when they have the opportunity to share an opportunity with someone else, with a colleague or whomever, as well as when it's time for them to be on that side of the table interviewing.
Right, pattern recognition. Yes. Absolutely. And I will add to that. The statistic that keeps me up at night is that according to the World Economic Forum, we are 202 years away from gender equality in the workplace. Yeah, whenever I say that in a room, I get that exact reaction. But it's dire and intolerable, right? And so, I spend all day, every day talking about gender equality, and I have a 5-year-old daughter, right? And so what I think is, I'm not gonna see it in my lifetime, but if we work really hard and make significant change to accelerate the timeline, she will. And so how do we achieve that? And I believe it's about getting more strategic, more collaborative, and this word is makes people nervous, but more collusive. We have to collude together, band together to help each other advance. And before I came to this, I worked at a major US newspaper.
You could say it.
The Wall Street Journal.
No harm.
While I worked there, I was an executive in the advertising business, and I became informal. I made an informal network with a woman who was senior in HR. And she was sort of a rising star, and I was a rising star. And when we were not in the same, we were both in rooms of power when important decisions were being made and not in the same room. And when I was not in a room, she represented me and stood up for me and helped advance me. And likewise, I did the same for her when she was not in the room. And even better, we back-channeled. So I knew what her conversations were, and she knew what mine were, and it got us both promoted and continuously. And so I just think
was that explicit?
It was never. We never planned it that way, but I wish we'd been smart enough to.
Now you all have something to do.
Right.
When you go back to the office.
And so I think as women in corporations and in an ecosystem, we have to think about really helping and supporting and lifting each other up and being deliberate. How am I going to get you ahead? How am I going to get you ahead and you ahead? And let's do it, because 202 years is not acceptable.
Right, and it's no different from what men have done historically, right? So it's not like this is some brand new thing. It's brand new for us, and I totally agree with you. And it should become something that is much more normal.
I'm going to throw out another stat, though, that might get you to sleep at night. It's a McKinsey stat. Okay, so advancing women, and this is an international number, is a $12 trillion global growth opportunity. And all of you right here are taking advantage of that female opportunity. Was that like the whole point of your businesses? I don't mean take advantage in a negative way. I mean to this is an important market, like commercially, socially, personally.
So let me take a stab at that. I think that all of our businesses, we all have mission statements, and we can say specifically what we're trying to go after. But I think if I were to speak for myself personally as a social justice warrior, I think about the big picture as well as the small picture. But what I want to encourage everybody here to do is not look at the job as the proxy for success. Did she get the job? Is the ecosystem supportive of allowing her or whomever is not getting to contribute, people of color, to contribute to change the social landscape of what our world can be? There are problems that are not getting solved now because of the folks that are not at the table. So I think of our organization as very part and parcel to changing that reality. Some of the problems that even get to be thought about to be solved are without having a diverse set of folks at the table. Those problems don't get considered, and so you've got whole populations who are not served. And so that should be a world problem. And we know that educating one woman changes the landscape for an entire community, and definitely for her family. The World Bank has given stats about that for a very long time. And so we think about those types of things, and I think where that's helpful is if people can't get with, I can't see Susie as a XYZ engineer, see her as a contributor to the world, the changing the world in which we live, the gross national product of the community, etc., of educating families, whatever you need to get really motivated to get this done, whatever it is, take that and run with it. Because at the end of the day, we don't have 202 years. In my mind, we don't have 2 years. Right now, we have algorithms and data sets that are harming people today. Why? Because the folks that at the table do not match the people for whom they created those algorithms for. That's dire, that's urgent. And so whatever you need to get motivated, please grab it and run.
I can add. So our research firm is not just focused on diversity and inclusion. Actually, I went to a women's college, but spent the first part of my career trying not to focus on the woman topic as a researcher. Just because I think as a researcher, I have some sort of role to be, unbiased and not to let everything in me influence what I'm doing. And now here I am 15 years later, completely at the opposite end of that. But how did we get here? And a part of that one is we did a big study on diversity and inclusion technology, which is actually on our website, free for anybody. So if you're interested in that, you can see that. But in those conversations, so much was focused, like we came across Fairygodboss. So much was focused on women and this economic opportunity. And for me, it was very much so, we want to help businesses be more successful, and we are coming up to a point where increasing our efficiency isn't getting humans any further. We have machines that will increase our efficiency. What we need are more ideas and more innovation, and the way we get there is with more diversity of experience and people at the table. And so that means certainly women, it means people of color, it means all sorts of people. And that's how I got here, is we need all the ideas on deck to get over the next hurdles that exist for mankind, womankind, peoplekind.
Yeah, I could throw out to add to that just simply, I started my career in consumer marketing, and so I relate to our business because it's the consumer experience that I embody and understand, and so I don't think I chose it because it was a female market opportunity, but more so that it was a subject matter that I felt I could pursue very expertly.
Okay, so there's two things that keep coming up in this discussion today that if we're going to talk about any kinds of solutions or advancement or changing the landscape, it's a two-prong approach, one through the technology aspect, and the other is through just changing people, changing ourselves, changing the people who are sitting at the table with us or pushing our way onto the table. So can each of you give to the audience like one thing that they can take back to their own workplace or their own organizations, that they can make this kind of change so that we can start right here?
I personally see the role of mentorship as being very valuable in promoting women, and helping everyone get to the next step of their careers. So I actually urge everyone in this room, if they don't have that, find a female collaborator or someone junior in the role you are. For me, there are female engineers that I do this for, just mentor them, share experiences with them, spend 15 minutes of a coffee, but that would make a huge difference in my opinion, in changing people and ideas one by one, because you're just implementing change yourself and recommend that to everyone around you. So I have that action item for people in this room rather than take it away.
Yeah, I would say two things. I think women should be ruthlessly helping each other, and we all have to be, and I still hear stories about how women are impeding each other, and it makes me sick, and I never want to hear those again. We all have to be raised with helping each other. And then I've also never heard about so many men wanting to help advance women. And I think empowering men and engaging them in the conversations, including them in the efforts, is essential. So opening those lines of communications and making all efforts as inclusive as possible.
So I would say, because there are a lot of solutions, obviously, but the two easy ones that come to mind is when you think about making a change in your workforce and diversifying it. Let's use the keyword in our presentation today: don't hire a token. It's not going to work. That person is going to be isolated, and they're going to go. It's about changing our mindsets about what makes for a diverse workforce and what makes for a successful workforce. I would say look at your company's, the representation of folks who buy your products and match that on your workforce. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if women are purchasing 60% of your products, then women should be 60% of the folks that are helping you to develop those products and make sure that they're right, period. Same thing with people of color. But the big thing in my mind is being unafraid. I think a lot of what we deal with this sort of inching forward, the 202 years, is that people are afraid of the loss of the entitlement that they already have within the organizations. And so if we can get past that and understand that there's nothing but success in diversifying your workforce. We know that the bottom lines are better. We know that the product development and uptake success is better. All of those markers are better. So what's keeping us from it has just got to be just plain old fear. So if we could throw that out, fear of that change, and embrace it, I think we could get there faster.
And then I would add, in the research we came across a big theme, which was, do we focus on fixing the woman or fixing the workforce? And and we have to fix the workforce. We have to fix the systems. And that could be technology systems, that could be our promotion practices, our hiring practices, et cetera. But if we continue to say to each individual woman, it's up to you to fix what you do. It's up to you to communicate differently. It's up to you to do these things. We continue to keep people from coming together and having a holistic system, and we put the individual blame on those individual women. Yes. And that is not fair. It's a system that has been developed that does not support anybody who is not the majority. So I once heard somebody say that if you're not intentionally including, you're excluding. So think about how you can intentionally include in the systems, not just individuals.
It's so important because when you put the responsibility on a single individual, effectively what you're doing is you're giving permission to those in power, whether it's within the organization or just at large. But one question that came to my mind, and we only have a minute left, but when you see, the word that stuck out for you was tokenism, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just say you're at a company and they're like, you know what? It's time to change. We have an all-white male workforce. That first person is inevitably going to be a token, right? So the intention is it the intention or the act? Where does that fit into it? Because it has to happen someplace, right? Mm-hmm.
So if it's not the first person but the first two, then you don't have tokens.
Yes.
Right? So it's always the issue of why is there one?
Right.
And I've been in corporate and I've been in startup. How did that happen? And how are the rules around who fits and who doesn't almost keep in place the ability to have that one. And so again, that's why to me it's more about the mentality, the narrative that has to change such that you don't have one. Now, if you're in a startup, it's one, right? And that person's got to be that brave person, but then also be given license and a place at the table to make sure that they don't stay the one. But if you're in a big organization, there's no reason for there to be one or 1%.
Right.
I mean, that to me is just...
I was actually also thinking in terms of panels, how there's been this movement, and like, oh, you have to have at least one woman on your panel, which is a token, right?
I've been that woman,
Yeah.
you know. So, and it's pretty funny too, because it what doesn't occur to people who are in the majority is that is occurring, and so being able to have these conversations is going to be really important, because it's like, I remember I walked up on a stage, there were 6 of us, and we were all finding our place because our names were there, and I looked up and I was the only person of color and the only woman. And I said, oh, I guess I'm the token for today. And everybody was like, you know, freaking out like I had said something awful. But I think there just isn't the awareness, and so we have to have these conversations.
Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you.